Learning
by Monish,
Stephanie,
Rohan,
and Comet.
Classical conditioning, also known as Pavlovian conditioning, is when a neutral stimulus elicits a response because it has become associated with the stimulus that already produces that response. There are four components to classical conditioning: an unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response, conditioned stimulus, and conditioned response. An unconditioned stimulus is a stimulus that results in a response that is unlearned. It is an automatic behavior. An unconditioned response is unlearned. It occurs without prior training and is an automatic behavior. A conditioned stimulus has been gradually associated with the effects of an unconditioned stimulus, and therefore it results in a response associated with the unconditioned response. A conditioned response produces the same reaction as an unconditioned response through repeated association of the conditioned stimulus with the unconditioned stimulus. There are 5 types of classical conditioning: acquisition, extinction, spontaneous recovery, generalization, and discrimination. Acquisition is the process of association. It's the gradual formation of an association between a conditioned stimulus and an unconditioned stimulus. Extinction is a process in which the conditioned response is weakened when the conditioned stimulus is repeated without the unconditioned response. Spontaneous recovery is a process in which a previously extinguished conditioned response reemerges after the presentation of the conditioned stimulus. Generalization is learning that occurs when stimuli that are similar but not identical to the conditioned stimulus produce the conditioned response. Discrimination is a differentiation between two similar stimuli when only one of them is consistently associated with the unconditioned stimulus. There are 3 more important points: second-order conditioning, the blocking effect, and the Rescorla-Wagner model. Second-order conditioning is when classical conditioning is introduced in an initial step. Essentially, associating A with B and then B with C ultimately means that in the second order, A is now associated with C. The blocking effect is preventing the acquisition of a new conditioned stimulus after a conditioned stimulus is already learned. The Rescorla-Wagner model is a cognitive model of classical conditioning, and it states that the strength of the conditional stimulus and unconditional stimulus is determined by the extent to which the unconditioned stimulus is unexpected. In this model, prediction error is the difference between the expected and actual outcomes.
This is Comet. He is a 1-year-old Japanese Spitz. As a puppy, Comet was extremely active and ran around the house quite a bit. One time, he ran straight into a propped-up hula hoop, which collapsed on him. Because he now knows that falling objects will cause him pain, he begins to fear the hula hoop even when it is set down on the ground. In this scenario, the unconditional stimulus is pain, the unconditional response is fear, the conditional stimulus is the hula hoop, and the conditional response is also fear.
Operant conditioning is a learning process in which behavior is controlled by consequences. There are 4 types of operant conditioning: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment. Positive reinforcement increases the probability that an action will be repeated. It does this by adding a stimulus that is likely to elicit the same response from an individual again. Negative reinforcement increases behavior through the removal of an unpleasant stimulus. Positive punishment decreases a behavior's possibility to the administration of a stimulus which is usually unpleasant. Negative punishment decreases a behavior's possibility through the removal of a usually pleasant stimulus. There are 2 biological and cognitive factors that influence operant conditioning: latent learning and insight learning. Latent learning is learning by observation. Insight learning takes place without reinforcement. The subject is able to make associations between objects and actions and can use that association to solve problems. Schedules of reinforcement are also important for operant conditioning. In continuous reinforcement, a behavior is rewarded or punished each time it occurs. This leads to fast learning. Partial reinforcement is an intermittent reinforcement of behavior. A fixed interval schedule occurs when reinforcement is provided after a fixed period of time. A variable interval schedule occurs when reinforcement is provided after a random period of time. You cannot predict when it will happen. A fixed ratio schedule occurs when reinforcement takes place after a fixed amount of responses have been made. A variable ratio schedule occurs when reinforcement takes place after a random amount of responses have been made. You cannot predict after how many responses it'll take for the reinforcement to take place.
When he was a few months old, we began to teach him tricks. To teach the command sit, we gave him a treat immediately after he placed his rear end on the ground as a form of positive reinforcement. After a few repetitions, Comet now knows to sit when we tell him to do so, even without the presence of treats.
Comet, sit. Sit. Good boy. Sit. Good boy.
We repeated the same steps with the command down as soon as he laid down on the ground.
Down. Down. Good boy. Down. Good boy.
If Comet did something that we didn't like, such as jumping on guests or chewing on furniture, we immediately gave him the word no as a form of positive punishment. Likewise, if we took away his favorite toy when he did something bad, this would be negative punishment. Neither of these examples were filmed for ethical reasons.
Observational learning is also known as social learning. There are two types of observational learning: modeling and vicarious learning. Modeling is the imitation of an observed behavior. It is more effective when the observed behavior is from an attractive or high-status person. Modeling usually causes an unnoticed change in behavior, so you don't easily notice your change in behavior. Vicarious learning is modeling with consequences. This is learning by observing, but the person being observed is either rewarded or punished for their behavior. So how and why does this all work? The answer is mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are an important aspect to observational learning. Basically, the same neurons that fire when you do an action are also fired when you observe someone else doing that same action. Mirror neurons only apply when an action has a purpose. For example, mirror neurons are fired when watching someone kick a soccer ball to score a goal, not when looking at a soccer ball. Weak mirror neurons result in poor learning abilities. Studies have shown a strong relation between dysfunctional mirror neurons and autism. Studies have not, however, found a relationship between impairments in mirror neurons and gestures and movements. This leads scientists to believe that mirror neurons are important to understanding the why, not just the what, of actions.
Rohan, a younger doggy friend of Comet's, often watches him to learn dog behaviors. He models how Comet licks his paws to clean himself, or how he chases his tail to amuse himself. Furthermore, when he sees that Comet gets treats when bringing Stephanie a toy, he vicariously learns from this reinforcement and also tries to bring Stephanie a toy.
Good boy.